Strangely enough, human police officers tend to be very quiet. In my admittedly then shallow research into the history of police forces in the region I was visiting, those designated in enforcing the law had some serious problems. They were not required to protect the citizens, nor know the laws they were sent to enforce. Training was as deep as a desert rain puddle, lasting only a handful of weeks before issuing lethal weapons and endowing these humans with both lethal authority and security against prosecution or consequences for bad decisions. It was routine for intelligent police officers to go unhired or even be fired, as less intelligence was actually preferred, and violence by law enforcement was routine. It was much to my relief that reforms in subsequent years after widespread failures by law enforcement, that a number of reforms were enacted. Training for law enforcement was raised from weeks to 2 years with mandatory education in law. Police unions were dismantled, body cams were standardized, and officers not in exigent circumstances would be fired if they worked while their camera was off. Legal reforms defined the job of law enforcement as the protection of citizens, and a national do-not-hire database was created that prohibited with prejudice the hiring of violent law enforcement agents. They were not permitted work in any sector that required security or protection of property or public well-being. De-escalation mandates were put into place where officer escalation was grounds for termination, and summary termination for involvement in harassing complainants became routine. As a result, the present-day law enforcement officers were quiet professionals, and I did not get shot. The ride in their car was, if anything, a relief. At the time, I didn't realize why I'd begun to feel so relaxed. But with time to reflect on it all, I realized something. Fauve was fine. William was taking action to help me, and the failed human I now call Wolfbeard was probably having a very bad time. Human medical technology is remarkable, but no less so than human vindictiveness, and I doubted that anyone would be showing him special care. To explain what I mean, consider the human thoughts on their fellows to be measurable, like a beaker with an upper limit, and any emotion you put into it leaves room for that much less of anything else. For better or worse, humans seem to have strong protective instincts to the point of bias in favor of children, particularly young girls who are seen as more vulnerable. If someone is accused of harming a young girl, that a beaker of emotions for the accused is filled with an intense amount of hatred. By contrast, if someone is accused of harming someone who has harmed young girls, that emotion-holding beaker is filled with an intense amount of affection. By the same token, humans have intrinsic biases on appearance, and this is frequently a cause for misfortune and sadness, as a human's outer appearance says nothing about who they are inside. This means emotion beakers get defaults of affection or dislike just at a single glance, something that is difficult for people to overcome. But on this occasion, it worked in my favor. When we arrived at the police station, I found it to be a 2-floor building with double doors of glass and metal. The officers opened the door and allowed me to slide out without handling me roughly. Here again is a distinction between humans and many other species. The variability of individuals being as broad as it is, their culture shifts from generation to generation, and so their institutions change to adapt. A study of Zenti legal systems would not change much from one century to the next, except for their adaptations to new technology. As caste systems are so common and division of labor so sharp, the cultures of other worlds, once so fascinating to me, now seem drab. Even something as simple as how an officer of the law interacts with a citizen on Earth seemed far more vibrant and alive. It is true that this variation in humans creates a wide variety of failed humans, such as this variety known as neckbeard. But with this variation comes their artists, their thinkers, their reformers, their creators of all kinds. The infinite potential of every single human willing to embrace their differences has not ceased to fascinate me, not in the 50 years I spent on their world and sharing their lives. As one example, when we emerged from the police car, I asked the officer nearest to me, "Did you always want to be a police officer?" He seemed surprised by the question, and he looked me up and down like he was looking for some sign of mockery. I cocked my head. Humans seemed to like that, and it got him to relax. No. He wanted to be a clown. His female partner said with a laugh, I could see the way her hand twitched, not toward her weapon, but whenever I cocked my head, it seemed humans had to fight the urge to reach for the spot between my ears. Her chest rose and fell while her partner's face turned red. I'd only heard of clowns as an insult, and seeing my confusion, the male chose to answer, perhaps because I was an alien and not expected to know much. Hey, she's not kidding. I went to college and took a clown class elective. I can still make balloon animals. Best class I ever took. I still use those skills to help settle kids down sometimes. I was at the top of the stairs right before the door when he said that, and before we went in, I stopped dead in my tracks. Can I see? The woman's hand was on my arm, holding me steady, humans and their physical contact. They're a very touchy species, and I was rapidly finding that I didn't mind that at all. Her partner, though, he let go, reached into his pocket, pulled out a long balloon, and after a long puff of air was put into it from his lips, began to twist, shape, and wrangle a shape into being. "Ta-da," he said at last, and held out the red rubber to me. "A dog. It seemed fitting," he said, and I was allowed to raise my hands up to hold it. "Wow, can I keep this?" I asked, and looked down at it, and I had to wonder something. What mad genius found a way to make sculptures out of air? The officer seemed quite pleased with my praise, but held out his hand. "Not through booking, but I'll put it in my locker and give it back to you when you get out of here." "Wait, leave? Am I not under arrest?" I asked, and looked down at my handcuffs. Humans use jewelry for many things, including things they themselves describe as pervy. But I was almost completely sure that I hadn't gotten caught up in a human reproductive game without noticing. Almost. The officer was quick to reassure me. Leaning forward and rising up on his tiptoes, he said, "We've gotten complaints about that guy before. The way your friend was yelling, and with all those witnesses, he skates by because of his rich daddy. But nobody is looking to hold someone who got in the way of his creepy actions. His daddy's money may buy him a lot of passes, but you're an important guest. If you want my guess, you won't be here for more than a few hours." Here I have to pause a happy narrative to relay something unfortunate. For many years, wealthy humans bought justice for themselves, or rather, bought their way out of justice. In the past, humans with billions of dollars could do anything they wished, and because of their vast wealth, leverage a kind of immunity for themselves. Many treated these figures as boons to their societies. However, it was found over time that the absolute power wielded by unelected people created a deep disconnect between themselves and both their world and the consequences of their actions. So after many years, a social compromise was reached. They capped personal wealth at $25 million, what would today be 30 million galactic credits, and put a statue of anyone who reached that cap in a public place, declaring that they won capitalism. All subsequent wealth was taxed and provided for vast social programs. Some of their billionaires resisted this at first, attempting to use art scams and false charities to funnel wealth back to themselves, but as the knot tightened, it became harder and harder to accomplish. So today a wealthy house might be able to buy some localized security from the law, but he could never buy as much immunity from the law as he wanted. Thus, the human officer was certain I would be kept only for a very short period of time. The booking process was an odd one. I pressed my fingers to a machine with a little red light, and it refused to read me. In the end, they just entered the word alien on a computer screen and let me move on in the process. I stood in front of a white wall with black bars evenly spaced with numbers beside them, and held a placard with my name on it and was photographed front and side. And then I was led into a small confined area of stone behind a door made of bars, with just enough space to reach my hand and arm through if I wanted. There were thin cots suspended along the wall, and a passed-out bald human lay snoring on one side of the room. Human snoring sounds much like machines sawing through thick wood, I admit. It is not my favorite noise. It is somehow worse when humans are thoroughly intoxicated. I sat on one of the cots. The mattress was soft under my hindquarters. My tail didn't wag, and I rested my arms on my knees. There was nothing decorative on the wall, and there were no books or games to pass the time. So I just watched the drunk human sleep. I could still smell the alcohol on him, and I had to wonder how much he'd had. A note on human intoxication. Humans are not the only species to get intoxicated. Certain other primates are known to pursue fermented fruits, or even steal bottles of alcohol from passing humans. But humans are unique in that they produce it, and they do so knowing what they produce. They produce poison. Humans poison themselves for pleasure. I just happen to be lucky that, as it turned out, some of it is really good. How did this get started, you may wonder? Recall that humans were once hunter-gatherers. They walked the land of Africa along the coast, eating grains, shellfish, and whatever else they could walk to death. In the course of these travels, they often carried food supplies, sometimes leaving it in place for long periods before returning to it. At some point in that time, humans stored grain somewhere in the open, and rain descended, filling the container. These coming and going rains resulted in the grains within undergoing fermentation before the humans could return, and when they did, some bold human drank it. This was the first beer. While little is known of this era, what is known is that shortly after this, humans began settling down into communities and growing more of these grains. Early storage containers dating back to the dawn of civilization show that there is beer stored that long predates the invention of bread. Mathematics was developed in order to keep track of supplies. Astronomy developed to keep track of planting and harvesting times. Tools were invented to create more stable buildings to live in long term and to ensure the easy harvesting of these supplies. Irrigation was invented to allow broader planting of these crops, and roads were developed to ensure smooth transportation of supplies from place to place. Even early records indicate that human currency was often based on beer. Thus, human civilization developed so that humans could more efficiently experience pleasurable poisons. I suppose what I'm saying is, humans love to get drunk. Ironically, drunks are generally looked down upon, as they impede the performance of social obligations. Instead, alcohol is used as a social lubricant, making the sexes both bolder and more receptive to suggestions from the lewd to the loony. Just a little poison is considered good, too much is considered bad, and part of their maturation process is learning to find that happy medium. Whether this makes humans scarier than before or not, as they are almost the only known intelligent species to enjoy poisoning themselves, I have never truly come to a conclusion, but staring at the big smile on the drunkard's face, wondering if he'd done something or if he was locked away for his own safety after a few too many. I think scary is an important word to keep in mind with humans. Having said that, I thought of Lisa and Mark and that marvelous first shot of bourbon. I think that was probably the first moment I realized that humans and Lamisa might make for marvelous partner races. The police officer turned out to be correct. I barely noticed the passage of time. Lamisa, like myself, tend to idle well, far more so than humans. But when my attention was drawn away from my contemplations of the self-poisoned human, it was toward the sound of a beep from a badge against an electronic lock outside the room in which I sat. The same male officer from before was standing at the entrance and holding the little red balloon dog. "See? Told you. You're free to go. Don't leave town. There'll be more following up on all this, but they're letting you go for now. Your bail has been paid. When you get a letter about a court date, just make sure you appear." Bail is a strange human practice, and isn't even found all over their world. But where it is used, it lets a person leave money as a prisoner instead of themselves. It means the human can go free and report back to the justice system later. As long as they comply, the money is returned to whoever paid it. But if the person who it is paid for runs away, then the money is forfeit. A strange practice to my eyes, but it works surprisingly well, even when the money is put up by someone other than the accused. The officer handed me the balloon and led me back to the entrance. I found William waiting with Fauve at the front desk. Neither saw me at first. They were busy typing out something onto a pair of fixed-position data consoles. The little clicks and clacks like an ancient typewriter went on uninterrupted. And notably, while they typed, Fauve complained. Her fist pounded on the surface of the window desk, while the officer went on ignoring her when they saw me and made ready to head to the exit. We were about to leave when a man in a black formal shirt with bright silver buttons and a large gold shield pinned over his heart approached us. "You're the alien? We need your statement before you can leave." All my ears went down when I heard his voice. I'm sure I looked absurd. I was still wet from the water and I was still clad in the blue swim trunks I'd borrowed from William before the trip, trunks that were still bloody in places. "We just paid his bail," William protested, but the officer, a giant of a man with an ugly scowl on his broad face and eyes that seemed to look through us both, replied, "Yeah, well, we need it. He should have had that done first. You can take him home in a few." The officer said with a smile that revealed that humans needed to brush far more often than Dlamisa did. "It's fine. I'm supposed to cooperate with Earth's laws while I'm here." I told William, and the officer grunted once before turning around and leading me to a room off to one side and gesturing to a table with only 2 chairs beneath a flickering light. As soon as he asked, I recited the events as I recalled them, acknowledging that I didn't know everything, but acted on what was very clearly a threat to the human girl. I then repeated it again when he asked it of me. And then again. And then again. He frowned. Did you memorize your statement or something? I cocked my head. I don't understand. It sounds rehearsed, he answered. While I'd been answering, he'd been typing it on a datapad, and so I was unsurprised about the match. I'm a Dlamisa, not a human. I know enough about your race that memories are fragmentary at best, but the same isn't true for us. Not to say we remember every minute, but if something feels significant and we have time to process it, we lose nothing. Ask me 100 times, you'll get 100 matching recitations. When I explained that, he gave a crude snort, sucking air in through his somewhat sizable nostrils. What I'd said clearly threw him off as he sat there tapping idly on the datapad, looking from it to me while water pooled around my feet and wet the chair on which I sat. Do you have any hostility toward humans? Toward human males? Anything like that? He asked, and I quickly shook my head hard enough to scatter droplets of water over the floor. No, I don't know many yet. I'm a Dlamisa of science. I'm supposed to withhold judgment until I know more, I answered, and he kept his face blank while he typed my answer. Were you trying to kill the one you attacked? He asked, and there I was hesitant. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was acting on instinct toward a threat to my human. I answered. It wasn't quite a lie, though it wasn't completely true either. In retrospect, I was acting on instinct, but Dlamisa predatory instincts are to act with lethal force. I had to repeat that 2 or 3 more times as well, but in the end, he was satisfied, or satisfied enough, that when a knock at the door came and another human poked his head in and said, "We need the room," he didn't protest about keeping me. He stood, and I took that as the signal for me to do the same. You're free to go for now, but, he looked at my shorts, you'll need to leave those. I shrugged, undid the little white fabric knot, and dropped them to the floor. Fine, but they're William's, so he may want them back. He did a double take when I reacted that way, and strolled out with my tail wagging behind me. As far as I know, William never did have the swimsuit retrieved. I exited to find Fauve scrawling her signature on a document and shouting at the officer. It's not fair! Bailey was just helping me. The creeper is the one who should be in here. She snapped at the person on the other side of the chest-high desk, a slightly overweight middle-aged woman with dark hair and visible makeup on her face. Makeup is yet another curious human practice in which a person paints chemicals onto their face to alter their appearance, but strangely enough, other than the chemicals applied to lips, it is generally meant to not be noticed. Instead, it is supposed to accentuate or disguise the natural features of the face, depending on the person. The human at the desk had one cheek resting on the palm of her hand, so that she was propping herself upright where she sat. She gave a very loud yawn, and then took a sip from a clear cup of brown liquid. Look, your friend sent a rich boy to the hospital, I get it. Creeper's gotta creep, but we've just gotta do our jobs. Your pet alien will be along in a little while. After the creeper gets his arm stitched up, maybe, we can see about arresting him too. From what I hear, you got lots of video, right? If somebody got footage of you getting grabbed and led away, we've got something. If we don't, then it's your word against the rich kid. And we already got his statement at the hospital your friend put him in. The woman sighed and shook her head. He says you wanted to talk privately, and he was just trying to help, that he thought you were just a lost kid or something, and that your pet just jumped him out of nowhere for no reason at all. That's outrageous, William protested and stopped typing. You have to know that's not true. They have security cameras there, look at them. Even if nobody recorded it, that had to catch him. And we'll request the security footage as soon as we can, once you fill those out at least. It'll just be a day, maybe less. I promise you we take this kind of thing very seriously, but he's in the hospital and he's not going anywhere. Your pet alien is going to be released. Mike has gone to fetch him. In the meantime, she reached down to her own mobile datapad and held the screen out. Now that you've signed those sworn statements and gotten all this started, you should know that this came in for you from the rich boy's father. I remained quiet, not wanting to interrupt, and stopped walking so that I wouldn't be noticed. Fauve's father began shaking. Angry humans shake when it gets bad enough, or when they're scared, or when they're cold or nervous. Shaking means a lot of things. But on this occasion, I deduced it was anger. Just because they shake for many reasons, that doesn't mean we can't figure out what the reason is. And William's grimace was so deep and fierce that I caught a flash of teeth when he spoke through their gritted position. It's a settlement offer. With a non-disclosure agreement? Is he serious? He thinks his son can just do that and I'll just take a payout and call it okay? Is this the Bronze Age? William's answer struck me as so strange that I had to research it later, and I found that what he referred to was a time in history in which daughters were considered property, and their abuse was considered a form of property damage not against them, but against their father. If a man's daughter was harmed, it was customary to pay the father for the damage done, and the damaged daughter would become the permanent mate of the one to damage her. This practice has fallen out of favor over the course of centuries, but the concept of paying currency as compensation for harm done has not. As I thought about it, I often wondered about the contradictions between the past and present, and I reached a conclusion that it was the change in the perception of families in the eyes of humanity that led to their current state. In the past, the family was a business, a machine meant to create laborers and shape members of a tribe into something valuable. Any affection was mere good luck, but the family was merely a tool which was wielded by the patriarch, and in some cases, the matriarchs of the households for the benefit of the larger society. Children were mere possessions to be trained for their purpose, and replacing them if they broke or died was a relatively trivial matter much of the time. Their cultural shift over ages produced something far, far more dangerous. Watching William shaking with rage, gritting his teeth and glaring down at the datapad conveying a settlement offer, I must relate, was stunning. I hadn't known him long, but even tempered and calm were my impressions. This was something else. The passionate devotion and love of a modern human for their family members culminated in a single act of defiance. William's fingers turned ghost white from the pressure on the pad, and he flung it past the woman at the desk and into the far wall, where it shattered into countless tiny pieces. He can go to hell. He can take his offer and shove it. You don't get to do that and walk away. I want justice. I want punishment. And by the way, Bailey isn't a pet. He leveled his now empty hand down at the woman and raised his pointer finger alone out from a closed fist so that it was leveled at her. He bit a man who put his hands on my child. That's not a pet. That's family. And only then did I step into view, and I couldn't have felt better when I did so.